Thank you, John. All right, so this is my first time addressing a clinical trials-centered audience. I'm a basic scientist myself, been working on Huntington's disease for about 20 years. I'm from Hamilton. Everyone know where that is? It's 45 minutes west of here at 3 o'clock in the morning in 1982. So otherwise, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 hours. Okay, so if we can have the first slide. What do I press? The big button. There we go. That makes sense. Oops, I think I skipped through one. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to declare some conflicts. I am a shareholder and scientific advisory board member of Mitochondrion LLC in the United States. I also have active collaboration programs with PTC Therapeutics in New Jersey and Triplet Therapeutics in Boston. So none of that's going to impact what I'm talking about today, but I think it's very important to talk about conflicts when listening to people from the research community, and I'm going to get a little bit onto that in my talk. So not everyone knows what Huntington's disease is. It's a little bit famous if you've ever watched House, because they had a very classic character played by Olivia Wilde of a doctor who knew that she was going to get this disease, but nevertheless was trying to live a life and deal with the issues. And it was extremely well done in that series. They had a lot of consultation with the HD community. Affects about 1 in 7,000, so it's considered a rare disease. And we have a kind of unique situation that we have DNA tests that we can give to someone above the age of 18 that will predict approximately when they're going to get sick or if they're going to get sick with this disease. So this is something that a person can carry with them for decades, that information for decades before they can actually have the onset of disease. And the disease involves classic motor symptoms as well as cognitive dysfunction. It's quite debilitative and eventually ends in death. So the Huntington Society of Canada was started in 1973 by Ralph and Ariel Walker on a kitchen table. It was, just a couple that decided that they needed to deal with this problem. Now it's a national and international organization. We're supporting research, patient care, education, social worker support, and facilitating clinical trials in this country. And in doing this, we've actually far ahead of most organizations worldwide, even the United States. We're very dynamic, so we're trying to constantly use the latest tools to try and address our patient population in Canada, which is anywhere between 3,000 and 4,000 people. And we've done all the newest tricks on this, including outreach to our community through social media campaigns, tools of interconnection. We have a really new emphasis on youth with YPAD, the young people's affected by Huntington's disease. And affected can mean they're either at risk for the disease themselves or they know they're not at risk for the disease, but yet have family members affected. And we have always had a strong mandate, which I have pushed through their board of directors, for knowledge translation, to really empower our patients by helping them understand exactly what the disease is that they're dealing with. And so I've set up a website along with 2 others called HD Buzz, which is now up to 1 million annual hits in 14 languages worldwide. It's actually now the most trusted resource for HD information above a person's own neurologist, which kind of surprised us in a survey that we had recently. And I've replicated all of this with another series of rare diseases called spinocerebellar ataxias. And that site is similarly growing, right? So we're getting into a new era in medicine, precision medicine with antisense oligonucleotides. You've heard about the treatment for SMA. That's one of these drugs. These are a new era of drugs that can directly modify the message from disease genes. So they will likely impact a lot of genetic diseases. And the concept here is that you can either shut off the mutant expression of the protein, or you can somehow repair the RNA so that the disease shouldn't manifest, right? And the real prototype for this at the level of development in clinical trials has been for spinal and muscle atrophy, or SMA. And the drug there is Spinraza. So what we've learned going into clinical trials for Huntington's disease, because we now have an ASO coming on board, we actually have multiple ASOs that are now in the pipeline for approval in Canada and worldwide, is that we had to be ready for this years before we even were told that the trial was about to take place. So we knew immediately this drug was coming down the pipe through people like me working with research labs and companies worldwide, but we also knew that we didn't have the clinical community ready to administer these trials. The drug has to be administered through spinal injection. And that's not as trivial as it sounds. But we did have outstanding centers in Vancouver, and Edmonton, and Toronto, and we had very senior clinicians with a lot of clinical trials experience, people like Mark Gutman and others. And what we then initiated was a clinical trial preparedness program to really bring all of our clinicians across the country, the neurologists at various centers, to fill in the gaps and bring them up to speed on how to conduct these clinical trials. So we started this preparedness program. We matched up through meetings across the country, senior, seasoned clinicians who've taken a lot of drugs through clinical trials. Mark Gutman, for example, did a lot of work in Parkinson's disease, and we paired them with younger clinicians just starting up, or clinicians who've had literally no experience with clinical trials but have a passion towards addressing this disease. And we prepared the book, the manual for a novitiate, the clinical trials for dummies, for these people to figure out how to work with Health Canada, how to have all the initial steps done to actually get a trial done within their clinics all across the country. And to back this up, we saw other gaps. And one of the gaps that we saw is we had a lot of very senior, excellent physicians in this country to do these clinical trials, but they're a little too senior, and a lot of them are considering retirement. So we have now initiated a clinical fellowship program to train younger scientists within these clinics to fill in those gaps in terms of demographics for the future. So it's been successful. We have the first clinical trials worldwide for ASOs from one ASO that's from Roche, Ionis, and a second one from Wave Pharmaceuticals. And in terms of the WAVE trial, Canada was ready to go almost 6 months before the rest of the world, because we had established this pipeline years ago. And it was so easy for WAVE to come to us in Canada that from the first conversation I had with that company to the actual first injection in clinical trial, it was a matter of only 6 months. So we got lessons from this, good and bad. The good from bringing people into these trials is we had a very high penetrance of our knowledge translation site, and we saw immediately that this was one of the most important aspects of establishing trials for this drug in Canada. So that gave us very good enrollment, it gave us very few dropouts, and the data got us through to phase 2, phase 3 trials, which are now taking place worldwide. So I would consider that well done. Now, we did have some bad in all of this. A big problem with hype and poor conflict declaration sometimes with people involved in the trials who would put on a hat of a doctor but yet have some financial or other connections to the companies involved in the clinical trial. So it's very difficult to be able to give proper information to our patients. In other words, avoid unrealistic expectations. These are not people who are going to walk into or stagger into a clinic with chorea and dance out of the clinic without any disease at all. So that type of correct information was really important for our patients to help them understand the process. So we had some concerns that biotech agendas were actually superseding science. These are companies that need to make themselves look very good for their stockholders and make themselves look very good for partnerships with very large pharmaceutical companies. And we were a little bit concerned and had to keep check on some pharma companies with what we think were manufacturing consent with some of our patients. So, as a word of advice, I would suggest that if you're in a rare diseases field or a diseases field that's seeing clinical trials for the first time, to try and avoid these 3 words when talking to your patients: success, failure, and cure, right? Every trial is a success because it gives us information. And it gives us critical information that can stop a pathway that's not going to work out for us and pivot and put limited resources towards a proper pathway. No trial is a failure, even if it doesn't help the patients. What it's doing is giving us information for the next stage in the pipeline and hopefully work things out. And cure is an extremely dangerous term to talk to with patients. You have to get an accurate gauge of expectations for a trial. So the message that we try to give to our families is a process. We need their help to make the progress. Without them, we cannot do this. We cannot understand what works in humans from compounds that come out of my lab. And our goal is to make their lives better, right? That's all we can say. Yeah, so just to stay one step ahead of this, we have to know now, be careful what we wish for. Because if we have a compound that works and we have a drug that's looking really good in trials, we have to be very conscious of the costs of these drugs. And then how are we going to deal with this with our patient population in Canada? Spinraza, for example, is US $750,000 a year, about $1 billion Canadian. I don't know why it costs that much. I have not heard a justification as to why it costs that much. But there are other solutions coming from other companies, and they're talking about one-and-done solutions that are going to be $5 million per injection. I just don't see any healthcare provider in the world being able to afford this, right? I don't know what the solution is. I don't think the solution is just pressure governments to pay, because if we do this, we're going to go bankrupt. We really need to think of a different way about pricing of our drugs. All right, thank you.